Good evening, and welcome as we gather this evening for this LGBTQ Religious Archives Network webinar. This evening's webinar is entitled, What Keeps Us Going? Elder Wisdom for Dangerous Times. We are so grateful that you have decided to give time and space to be with us for this evening's webinar, when you could be so many other places. Your presence suggests to us that you recognize the importance of this conversation and of this topic. I know that it's an important topic, personally, professionally, spiritually, mentally, and psychologically. It's important because there's a quote from Tom Burrell of Burrell Communications, which says, we need to know what's possible by what was possible at a time when the challenges were even greater. And they're less challenging today because of all of the work, all the pioneers, all the doors that were opened by the multiple ancestors in times past. We need to know what's possible by what was possible at a distant past time. And that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to gain wisdom and perspective from elders in the movements. We're going to gain insights and inspiration and encouragement. It is my hope that we'll gain all of this, and then we'll be inspired and motivated to take on the challenge of these times because of what we knew and have learned was possible in past times. Thank you for being here. And in a moment, we'll get started.
Thank you so much, Cedric. It is such a pleasure to get to do this with you. So we gather tonight in the midst of profoundly difficult times for all of us, and particularly, I think, for the LGBTQ plus communities. Attacks on trans lives are escalating. Marriage equality is under fire. Our histories are being scrubbed from classrooms, monuments, and public memory. For many of us who came of age during a time when public support for LGBTQ plus people seems steadily on the rise, this moment can feel not just disorienting, but devastating. And yet, it wasn't so long ago that public opinion was overwhelmingly against us. Our communities were dying. Even many of our so-called progressive allies were silent or slow to stand with us. Our elders and leaders on this panel lived and organized through those times, as well as in the moments when the tide began to turn. And that's why we brought them together tonight to reflect with us on what helps us endure, where we draw our strength, and how we keep the faith when everything around us says we shouldn't. Our history, and this is so powerful for LGBTQ-RAN, our history is not just something that we preserve in a library on a shelf. It is a living, breathing resource for survival, for resistance, and for imagining a better future. And our hope is that this conversation will strengthen your resolve. LGBTQ plus people have always made a way out of no way, building beauty and belonging even in the most dire of times. So I want to introduce you to this remarkable panel before we get started, and I turn it back over to Cedric. So Reverend Harry Knox began his faith organizing work with Equality Georgia and Equality Florida in the 1990s. And that's what it says on the bio, but if you know Harry, it probably happened like when he was about 10 years old. In 2003, he became the National Program Director for Freedom to Marry. And in 2005, he changed my life by becoming the founding director of the Religion and Faith program at the Human Rights Campaign, where I got to work with him. He mobilized coalitions of faith leaders across the US for LGBTQ equality and was appointed to the White House Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships by President Obama in 2009, where he played a key role in civil rights policy development. So glad you're here, Harry. Reverend Louise J. Mitchell has been active in community care since the late 1970s, focused on health, healing, self-determination, and respect, especially for trans communities. He is the senior pastor of Rincon United Church of Christ in Tucson, Arizona, and co-founder of Transfaith with Chris Page, who I believe is here with us today. He's a father, an activist who brings the restorative power of truth-telling into all that he does. We're so honored to have you with us, Reverend Lewis. Bishop Tonyia Rawls founded the Freedom Center for Social Justice in Charlotte, North Carolina in 2009, a longtime businesswoman and a fierce one at that. I know her in that role too. She turned minister and became a cleric in the Unity Fellowship Church movement and later founded Sacred Souls United Church of Christ in 2015, where she is pastor emeritus. She is a co-founder of the Black Mountain School of Theology and Community, a progressive experimental seminary that brings activists and seminaries into shared learning. Her leadership extends across national movements for justice and equity. So if those on this in this Zoom know these folks, you know that we could have gone on for about 10 pages for each of them. It is a very short summary of the beautiful work that they have done, but we're really honored to have you all here. Thank you so much. And I will turn it over to Cedric to get us started.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you to our august panelists who will be sharing in the conversation. It's my distinct honor to begin the conversation with our august panelists with a question. And it's kind of a question that kind of gives a better insight into the much longer bio of these great folks. Question is this. Thinking back, how did your coming out journey intersect with your call to ministry? What were some cultural or spiritual realities at that time? What was the climate at the time? And so rather than asking someone to volunteer, I'm going to go old school, because I can be old school, and go, go alphabetically. So there's, let's see, I think that would be Harry. Harry, talk about your coming out journey and the intersection with ministry, and what was the climate at that time?
Well, it's difficult for me to tell this story in a short period of time because my coming out journey and my call to ministry process were such a mismatch for a number of years. But I think I can tell you, and I apologize for my voice, friends, I have a condition that causes me to stammer when I'm under pressure. I will get better, I hope, over time. But those two things are mashed up together, and it took a long time. But I had one occasion that called the question for me about whether to come out. I was one of those people who tried to go through the ordination process and hide my sexuality. And that was hard. It was so hard. And in my little 90-member student pastorate congregation in rural South Georgia, I had 3 families that were dealing with homosexual children and how to raise them in Christian manner, but also to continue to love them thoroughly. And I had not a clue what to say to them. And I remember when one mama came to see me, I handed her Letha Scanzoni and Virginia Mollicott's wonderful book is The Homosexual My Neighbor, and ran just as fast as I could from that conversation. Now, why I say that to you is to make a couple of points. One was I took that as a mini ordination because I felt like at the time it was a grand mistake. And I began to study about my own faith and my own life so that I wouldn't make that mistake again. And I found that gave me it gave me a lot of good practice over the years after that. That mistakes were the things that taught me the most. And the other thing was that a layperson in rural South Georgia can be the cause of something good. If you think that my ministry ended up to be something good for the movement, I pray that it was.
Thank you so much, Harry. This is why we call it wisdom. So next, I believe that we have the Reverend Lewis Mitchell.
Well, what an interesting question. I wrestled with this because I'm not sure that they had any relationship at all, honestly. So my coming out in the 70s had nothing to do with organized religion except my great desire to run from it as quickly as humanly possible. And interestingly enough, the church that I ran screaming from, I'll be visiting next week for the first time in lo these many years. Y'all pray my strength, and those of you that know me, pray for the hesitation of my speech when they vex my nervous system. Okay, I'll just get that out of the way. I pray that there will be no throat punching involved in my mother's service from me. My calling is I call it more of a dragging. I came to organize religion, specifically Christianity, kicking and screaming and yelling at God, please leave me alone. I'm not the one. I don't want to. And then I made that statement that never rings true. You can't make me. Well, that didn't work out at all. So the thing that I think I want to say about this is that every gift that came from my journey, my missteps, my bad choices, my near-death experiences, my being rebellious and cantankerous, every one of those things that I had seen as a bottom ended up being a gift in my ministry. And when I was praying to God and saying, God, why me? Why me? Why me? Why won't you leave me alone? The message that I felt in my spirit was that you will go where the holy people won't go. You know that blood and shit wash off. I need you to go to the people that I need you to go to, that they're too holy to touch. And that was my yes. And so in that way, my journey, my coming out journey, and all the places it took me, to and through bathhouses and bookstores and behind bookstores and alleyways and Griffith Park on Sunday afternoons when being promiscuous was a sign of pride. All of those things and surviving all of those things are the foundation and the bedrock of my ministry that says you don't have to get it together to come, just come on. And that is, I think, the joy of my journey. I don't consider myself um, as holy as most, perhaps not even as set apart as most, but I do consider myself a testament to Jesus of Nazareth and the ability to touch and to heal and to be with those who are the most broken and say, this is for you too. And that is kind of the cornerstone of my faith and where my coming out and my coming to ministry seem to merge.
Thank you so much. Bishop Rawls, what do you have to share?
Well, first, it's wonderful to be here and definitely with Sharon and my brothers. We do go way, way, way back. And Harry, I want to just give you, Reverend Harry, a public thank you because so much of my national faith work actually began with you. And the work we did in the 90s and however long, I don't, it's before the 90s even. I don't even remember exactly when, but I want to publicly thank you for that because it opened up many doors. And Sharon, the work we all did together as well, as with Lewis, Reverend Lewis and Reverend Harmon. Um, I my journey was familiar for many. I was not someone that when I was coming up, I was thinking, oh, I like girls. I'm an out lesbian. So, as I'm talking about my coming out thing, I really liked boys a lot. Okay. And they liked me. So that was a good combination. And then I fell in love. It was about love. I fell in love with, I was working in advertising at the time, and this beautiful graphic artist slash dancer was flitting around, and my heart got touched. We were each other's first lover. And so it was a fascinating love-based journey. And it was one that helped me to understand, because I do have to kind of tell the two pieces. So I just graduated from college. I'm living in LA now and not in New Jersey, northern New Jersey, where I was living, a pretty upright life in terms of I'm just going forward with all the plans, right? We have these plans as young people. And not only did I find warm winters, but I also found a woman. And what I found with this woman was home. It had nothing to do with, like, probably if I was to define myself, I probably could define myself as bisexual, but home is with relationships with women. We're having grown folk talk here, so I want to talk specifically, right? And I'm hoping that someone along the way, if there's something you can catch, but that's important to note because it is wrong to assume we all get to this place the same way. We do not, right? That was not my history of at 12. I had a girl, I liked this girl and all of that kind of stuff. I realize now all the signs were there the whole time. However, right? Where the church came in is at the same time that I fall in love with this woman, I'm introduced to the Church of God in Christ. West Angeles Church of God in Christ is down the street from where I lived. And so I fall in love, and don't laugh, Reverend Mitchell, okay? And I fall in love with God anew in the Church of God in Christ, okay? Wait, in the prayer room of the Church of God in Christ. So I lived this very closeted life up until I was proposed to by a man, actually, one of the elders in our congregation, 25 years my senior, and a quote unquote delivered pedophile. Okay. Now, high level in the church. And this is my coming together of my coming out and the melding of my faith walk. And so God and I actually had a very heated conversation. I said yes to this engagement. And I said yes after being celibate for 6 years because at some point, this kind of trajectory of me being in love with a woman and me going deeper into my faith walk, knowing God had called me, but not seeing a path for how God could use my gifts as a same gender loving woman. So I just jettisoned it. I just acted as if I could take my gayness off. God knows, I'm amazed I have any hair left from the amount of oil that has been poured on my head. Okay. I wanted myself to be delivered. I did not want this thing that I thought God did not like, God did not approve of. And so after I said yes to this engagement, and it is important to note I'm an incest survivor, I felt God set me up. I was like, so of all the people in the world, you know, because I was like, God, okay, if I'm to be with a man, you give this back to me. You bring that back because I still wanted to be with women. And God and I had a very intense conversation that night. I'm sitting Indian style in my room. It's in the 80s. There's no path forward, seemingly, for me to be able to be a woman of faith and God and same gender loving. So I was like, it's not a debate. I just can't be. And in this conversation with God, I everything came up. I said, number one, yes, it was a pointed discussion. Number one, you clearly don't love your daughters as much as your sons. Because if you did love us, because I had three other friends that had similar kind of proposals. We were all very successful. I was working in marketing and advertising in Century City. I've got this burgeoning career. The guy that I was about to marry worked like part-time as all but a janitor, but he was high up in the faith world. And so I also felt that God was not fair. And that's something big for somebody that that I'm saying, you know, prayer every morning, Monday through Friday at 6 a.m. before I went to work. Okay. Shut-ins, 3 days, no food, no water for 3 days, shutting in, working while I'm shutting all the, I mean, as faithful as I could get, right? And I was like, with all this faithfulness, and you're going to let this happen to me. Because it was just something I was going to do because I was taught to divorce myself from my body. I shouldn't be thinking about my body. I shouldn't be thinking about sex or sexuality and those things. I should only be thinking about spiritual things. And if I only thought about spiritual things, he was a decent enough catch. And then God began to talk. And I'm crying crocodile tears at this point because I'm thinking God has just abandoned me. And God said, first of all, I did not make a mistake when creating you just as you are. I didn't. And asked me to say all the things I felt that a good father would do if his daughter came and said, I'm about to get married. And the things that were said, I was saying things like he'd want to make sure that he could provide for her. He'd want to make sure she loved him. You know, I'm going through all this list of things. And God simply, at the end of all of this list of things, said, true, but I am not a man. And what I want for you far exceeds that. Number one. Number two, I didn't make a mistake. And number three, if you choose to marry him, I'll bless you. But also, if you choose not to marry him, I'll bless you because I'm going to bless you because you're my daughter. That night, God became my father. Let me just say that for the first time. Secondly, God says to me, and in addition, I'm ultimately going to use your authentic self to my glory. Come on, y'all. Come on. To your glory. How you going to use me as a lesbian to your glory, right? I'm thinking that I'm going to hell, and you're telling me you're actually going to use my fullness as this liberative force. And God did it. Did exactly that. First of all, the next day I broke off the engagement, went and told all my friends they should break theirs off too, which they did not, and all of them got divorced. But secondly, I did it partly because I knew I would destroy two lives. It wouldn't have just been my life that had been destroyed, it would have also been his life. And I'd seen so many of us who did that because the church had us believe the only way we could advance was to marry. They didn't care about what I did. They knew who I was and did not care as long as it wasn't public. And so I shared this piece of my narrative because it doesn't get out often, but it framed how I move forward in the world. I was so clear that we did damage to people. And so much of my life now is committed to reparative work and hopefully reimagining the possibilities of love. So thank you.
That's just gorgeous. Thank you. And I've been paying a little bit of attention to the chat as we've been going. And we do have a Christian panel. We recognize that. And I guess what I would, we chose these folks because we wanted to get people that had the longevity and leadership in the work. And we emphasize that. So what I would say for those that are not Christian, we're so glad that you're here. And we hope you'll stick around for afterwards and we can talk about about your stories. But I would just ask that you listen for what resonates and what challenges and what doesn't, as we move forward. So that was so powerful. And I loved this piece that I'm always struck by when we talk to queer folks. It's about this sense of the, like, as I think Reverend Lewis talked about, like um it's the thing that felt like it was the bottom, the worst of us, is actually the thing that is most in need. It's the thing that calls us out. It's the actually the gift. That's just that incredible to be reminded of that. We wanted to ask some questions around preserving and reclaiming history. So we're wondering about, what do you most want people, and I'm thinking here particularly of younger folks, to remember and reclaim in this moment when we're seeing so much historical erasure? Um, so Cedric's the more formal of the two of us. I'm more of the hippie. So I'm going to do it popcorn style and let the person most inspired by that question to go first.
I'll speak to that. Partly because I marvel at our younger generation. I marvel at them, and you all who are on the line who are 40 and under in particular. Because you're not bound in the same ways we have been. There are things that are in my DNA that cannot be extrapolated. It kind of is there. And so I have to work. I work still at times finding my voice as a woman cleric. I work still at times finding those ways that I can be most impactful as a same gender loving woman. There's still work that's being done in reference to that, right? That some of you will never have to deal with because that just was not your path. It was not your core formation, right? There's a reason that the children of Israel, the ones who were born into slavery, couldn't come into the promised land. What was clear was part of why they couldn't come in was because they were bringing that kind of mentality of the old. What I love about working with our younger generation is your courage and boldness. The I think the most I think that one of the sweet spots is when we're able to blend the wisdom of the elders and the youth and courage of the younger generation. When those two are able to meld together, all kind of things are possible. And I will say lastly that when I was younger, I didn't fear taking bold steps. I didn't. I have stepped into multiple careers. I have stepped into multiple phases of ministry because God is dynamic. Faith in the ways that we are learning and it's evolving, it is dynamic, it is not static. And I'll say to those who are non-Christian that while Christianity is my base, it is not my only. Okay, so I think it's important to note that it is not reasonable in this day to assume that everybody is an only Muslim, only Christian, only Buddhist, only Sikh. I am learning. I feel more and more like Mother Teresa at the end of her life, and I hope I'm going to be living a lot longer. I'm not talking end of life here, but toward the end of her life, what many people may not know is she had a genuine crisis of faith. And one of the things she said that struck me so profoundly was she said, when I am the best version of me as a Christian when I am a good Muslim, when I am a good Sikh, when I am a good Jew. I'm that's when I'm the best Christian, right? And I know there are many people who grappled with that. It's because, like, isn't Jesus the only way? It's like, yes, Jesus is my way and a way, but can we possibly put God in a box that small? So I would challenge young people to think big and to not write us off so quickly. We got a few things to offer, right? So that's what I would say.
Beautiful. Uh, yes, anyone, Reverend Harry, Reverend Lewis?
I will go ahead and get out of the way and let Reverend Harry end us with his wisdom. I want to start by saying something that I think is important for me to say about the T, specifically the T. Now, everybody who's not T, you can listen in, of course. You don't need to shut me down quite yet. But the T has been both useful and used. So as we talk about LGBTQIA+++, it is important not to collapse the experiences of each of these groups, because when that happens, usually the groups with the least power lose out. And I'm saying that specifically when we talk about what we need to know about our journey and our histories. Part of our intra-community histories have also been distorted and lied about, if I can be honest. There are organizations, some of whom have been mentioned, that have been specifically terrible to T people throughout their history. They're all good now, but they weren't then. They weren't good with Black people. They weren't good with T people. And so I need to say that because as we are finding our history, what you also need to know is when you uncover some things, everything's not going to be all sweet and pretty. Boo, it's not. There's some internal history that we still need to wrestle with and amends need to be made from. These people ain't dead, they're still alive. Amends need to be made in order for us to trust our own history and trust our own historians enough to have them show us the broader history. So in my coming out time, I started at the LA Gay and Lesbian Community Services Center back when it was the Gay and Lesbian Community Service Center, and it was a big fight to add lesbian. And I started in this little organization called Lesbian Central. That's what we were called. Little Lesbian Central, a little cute, bunch of dykes in overalls and stuff, and peaceful, angry people all doing their thing. And trans people were not a part of that. Trans people were around, but they certainly were not valued. They didn't add any monetary grant-worthy gain to the organization. I'm gonna be very bald about this. When we became a population that could be served and funded, we became much more popular as an idea, but less popular as individuals who were already doing the leadership. That's just the truth. And so what I will say to you about reclaiming your history is reclaim all of it. Find those people, those that one auntie in the community, that old one, that old one that's still at the show or still at the bar, wherever she is, the one that you went to when you was trying to figure out where you could get your hormones. Take her to lunch and ask her story. Ask what happened to the people around her. Find out who your local elders are and find them. One of the things that has disturbed me mightily over the last few years is the many trans people who are languishing away in nursing homes being misgendered and misnamed every single day, where their families threw them away 30 years ago and their community never got to know them. I got friends and family that are looking for them so we can minister to them, because while we focus a lot on the youth are powerful and amazing, and they have rights and ideas that we never had. The other thing I want to say is there was a time, at least in trans history, when we didn't have any of these rights. We didn't have access to hormones. And if you were queer and you went through the Harry Benjamin standards, you couldn't even get on hormones. You had to be straight. You couldn't tell anybody. These were the rules. So in order for us to have a community, somebody had to break the rule of non-disclosure. Community came from rule breaking, not assimilation. I need you to get that. The histories are out there. Monica Roberts did an amazing job of sharing our histories. There are books out there that share our histories. Find them, get a reading group. Do it online if that's your happy place. But know that, and I really want you to hear this. And before I forget, thank you, Bishop Rawls, for talking about non-binary faith. I am not just a follower of Jesus Christ. That's my day job. But my full entirety has more of I believe in a kaleidoscopic divine rather than a Trinitarian one. So that's just, my side for that. But the thing I really, 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 really want you to get in your heart is that some version of you has always existed. Some version of you has always existed in every place, in every culture, in every time. And while in some of those places we were celebrated, more often than not, we upset the apple cart and there was erasure affront. We've been through this before. We know how to do this. It's important that we remember historically and spiritually, if you will, that we already know how to do this. And we know that we will get through this, and not all of us will survive this. I think it's an important thing to have hope and room for grief in the same hand because they will go hand in hand. So, if you're out loud and proud, be that. If this is the time when you need to hide to take care of yourself, be that and let someone know how to find you. Buddy up, buddy up. Final thought, one of the integration and the internet have some things in common with me. There's some great things that came out of them, and there's some losses that came out of them. One of the things that we lost in integration was turning to one another for support because that's all we had. We've also lost some of that in the internet because we were so far dispersed, which is beautiful. It's great for my 12-year-old trans kid who's just starting this journey. It's awesome. But what we've lost is that place. I remember in Corpus Christi, Texas, we all hung out at one bar because that was the only bar we had. Everybody went there. Gay, questioning, drag queens, street walkers, police officers, whoever you were, if you were in that big LGBT thing, you went to that bar because that was the only place to go. So we had one another in close quarters. Now we have so many wonderful silos, and many of them are virtual, that it seems like it should make us closer, but it hasn't. So I want to invite you to find someones to make your nesting partners during this haul. Someone who you can fall apart with. If you're in clergy, find someone who's not in your denomination or not in your faith experience so you can be a hot mess and not worry about the politics of work. Find someone who you can be your entire self with, that you can show up messy, that you can celebrate your joys, that you can celebrate your deep sorrows and sadnesses, and ride with that person, not for the rest of your life. Make a commitment for 6 months, a year, 2 years. You're going to be my ride along for a year. Because the one thing that we have going for us is that we have the capability of being so close that none of us can fall without witness or support, if we will. If we will. And we have that at our access. And so let's do that. And then try your best to forgive those people who have irritated you in the past, if you can. Because one of the things about our community, if you do the work for long enough, it's like reaching into a box of broken toys. You don't know if you're going to get a gift or get cut. There's a lot of hurt and hard feelings still intra-community. You ain't got to forgive everything anybody's ever done, but you can say, we're in this together. You take the left side, I'll take the right side. I don't want to really march real close to you, but we're in this together. Let's not try to hurt each other. The history is there. The present is there. The future is already being born into us. And recognize this for exactly what it is. It is the dying gasp of a deeply bigoted society that is wilding out because they know that they cannot destroy us. And they're using everything in their arsenal. They're at the bottom of their drain now, and they're going to throw everything at us. We can withstand this. This is a dying gasp. While they're gasping, let's breathe together. We are better together.
Ooh, that is so powerful. And there are so many directions to go with there. I just want to flag two things and then ask Carrie to jump in. But this inner community history of erasure feels so important to be able to claim that at the same time that we're looking at kind of public erasure by the right? So thank you for Brent for that. And then in the chat we had, and this was true for Reverend Bishop Rawls as well. the kaleidoscope divine, not a Trinitarian one. People are loving that, and just thinking that we are not singulars, we're multiples. So thank you for that. And there's so much more we could do there. I want to get Harry's voice in this conversation.
Well, there are two things, one that's fun to talk about and one that's difficult to talk about, that I hope will be remembered about our time in the movement for queer equity and particularly for marriage equality. The one that's fun to talk about is that our part of the movement, the religious part of the movement, met the needs of that 30% or so of the people who are in the movable middle that politicians and organizers always talk about. We get so tired of hearing it and talking about them. But they are, of course, the deciders and the people that create the tipping point that allow policymakers to do what they know is right, whether the Supreme Court or legislatures, whatever. Our opponents were religious. The opposition to our lives in the public sphere was set in religious terms. And until we met that in religious terms, we did not make much progress. As long as we only met it with a sense of fairness. Fairness doesn't mean much to a lot of people, as we are now seeing in this country in horrible ways around immigration and other things. But we were able to do that, and it was important work. It was one of the reasons we won for a while. Now, the reason we were able to do it was because an awful lot of people had been doing work in their proper settings around inclusion of LGBT people. And that was important to do because they found language that worked for them and for their peers in the community. The Lutherans talked about what made sense to Lutherans. The Episcopalians talked about baptism. Catholics talked about what made sense for Catholics. And they organized themselves to make change within their own denominations. The progressive Jews did the same thing. Ani Zanneveld's work among progressive Muslims, all those folks did work that made sense for their communities. And we were able then to marshal those people who had been doing deeply spiritual work in order for their community to be welcoming into a political movement that was about a short-term political gain. But that gain was rooted in deeply spiritual work that we could not have replicated, we could not have organized on our own. It came from decades of work that we had nothing to do with. We could only be grateful for the work that Spirit had done and ride the wave, as Zemsky would say, that Spirit was providing us. And that's the fun part to say. The other thing I hope is not forgotten is that there was a time in my time at the Human Rights Campaign that I think is emblematic a little bit of what Luis was talking about with erasure of part of our community. The organization had to decide whether to support a non-discrimination bill, a form of the Employment Non-Discrimination Act that left out the T, left transgender people out, because we were told by Senator Kennedy and others that it would pass if we would leave the transgender people out. And I can tell you that the Sturm und Drang at the top floor of that building was great. The leaders of that organization fought with themselves in dark nights of the soul, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. One night we would leave, Sharon and I, celebrating because we thought that our side, that we should include transgender folks, had prevailed. And the next day we would come back and it seemed that the thing was going in a different direction. And ultimately, the final decision was made that transgender people would be left out of that conversation. Now, what does that got to do with religious things in this setting? Sharon and I almost quit our jobs that day. I came within a hair's breadth of doing it. And let me speak for myself now. I decided not to quit because of my faith, that this was one of the moments that I had to stand in the gap and take it, because people I loved were hurting. And it didn't matter whether I was going to like it or whether it was going to be easy. I had done hard things before, and this was going to be another one, perhaps the hardest one I had ever done. And Sharon and I reached out to every transgender person we knew, and we got earful after earful after earful. But particularly the wonderful, beloved Barbara Satin at the United Church of Christ gave us the earful, and then agreed to invite us to transgender spaces, not just religious spaces, but secular spaces too, where we could do just what I described, stand in the breach and listen, and not do anything else except listen to the anger. And I think that terrible tour did a lot to keep our community together, the little bit that it was kept together in that moment, until we could move forward, because of the grace of transgender people, and particularly the grace of Barbara Satin, who acted out of her faith and her sense of grace, and what that meant, that she should open her arms to us again, even though she didn't really think we deserved it. Grace isn't about what we deserve, after all. So I hope that won't be forgotten. I hope somebody will write that story down. I'm going to be ashamed to death to have my name associated with it, but I hope it gets written down.
Thank you.
So I would invite, yes, Sharon, I would.
No, I wanted
invite-
to, no, you please.
Yeah, I would invite us to recognize that real conversation is not always just fluff and beauty. Real conversation means dealing with real things and dealing with real hurt and real emotion and real experience. We are, as a matter of fact, human beings, and so we can do damage even when we think we're doing well. So it leads to this question around determination, around self-determination, and around how do you keep going when things are not smooth and easy, when the veritable place that you thought was safe is burning, and sometimes the people that you care about are the ones that started the flame. What what is it that gives you the ability to keep the faith? Not a singular faith, but to keep the faith in something transformative, and then that things will be better. I won't even broaden it. I want to ask, who are the voices, or what are the voices? What are the places? What are the tools? What are the readings? What touchstones do you go to when it gets really, really tight and tough? What did you use, and what would you recommend for this current moment that people turn to? What voices actually helped you in those really, really tough times, that kept you aware of the possibility of something better?
I'll start if I may. The poet May Sarton was a Unitarian, if she was anything. She writes in her journals so beautifully about anger. And she is a touchstone for me, as she resolves or doesn't resolve her own anger. And I really recommend her to everyone.
Others?
I am a Black lesbian. Okay. And my hope comes because multiple parts of my being have made progress under unimaginable circumstances. And I'm a student of history, and so I have to say that historical patterns keep me encouraged. Secondly, and that's second. First is I really do still believe in God. Do. I believe in a God that is anchored in love, and that love will always be bigger. I know it to be true. I know I've lived long enough. I turned 67 on this past Sunday. In 67 years, I've learned many lessons. Among the lessons I've learned is that when we have a God-inspired mission, right? There were times I didn't trust myself, but I trusted God. I've stepped into big things, right? I was built for culture shifting work, which means a part of me has to be comfortable with immense discomfort. A part of me had to grow in my ability to work with those who one day would love me and the next day would literally try to cut the legs out from under me. Not always even intentionally so, but just through the process. I've had times where I've had to question whether or not the work I was doing was even worth it anymore. But what I can say is, I had an experience, just a really quick story, because it's essential to how I became this version of myself in my 20s. I graduated from college in 76. However, I'm sorry, in 80. I went in 76, graduated in 80. Um, I went to a predominantly white institution for college, coming from Newark, born in Newark, raised in the Oranges. Black and Latino was all I knew. I then come south, I go to this school, No, I was one of, I think I may have been part of the fifth class of students of any color. And even then, it was only 2% students of color, all of us combined. I had never failed in school ever. And my first semester, I flunked damn near everything. Shuddered my soul. I went to my advisor in the end of my first semester, and I was so happy to go into this session because I'm like, I'm going to get help and somebody can help me, right? I don't have to do this by myself. And I sit in front of this older white woman who all she could think to say to me was, I see you were a straight A student. If you went to another school like a Howard, you could be an A student again. It took every bit of Jesus I had to not cry in front of that white woman, okay? Because even though I was just 18 years old, but something in me knew that that was not okay, whatever was going on. And after she goes through this whole thing, I said, so now that you've told me how to leave, can you help me know how to stay? I bottomed out that day. I made it home to my mother. I made it to my dorm room so I could call my mother. We ain't had cell phones. I had to call from the phone hanging on the wall in the hallway, okay? I called my mom, and after 10 minutes of hysterical crying, and she finally finds out what happened, and she simply said to me, Tanya, if you decide to stay, I know you can succeed. If you choose to leave, I will be proud of you because I know you did your best. That's all I needed to hear. That moment broke me and helped me to understand I can always rise. And I want to say to those who are watching that sometime our faith walk can be informed by things that have nothing to do with faith. This had everything to do with my experience at Duke University and the fact that I felt like I could not succeed because this thing so far exceeded me. Nothing has scared me since that situation. I just don't get scared because everything I understood to be true was snatched. And then in this environment that was not built for me to succeed, right? But I knew there was a God who could get me through anything. Have I grappled with that God in times? Absolutely. Have I questioned? Absolutely. But the thing I've never done is doubt whether God is able. So whenever I am committing to a thing, I know God can do the thing. The key for me is, can I get out of the way? Right? That's so much of the work. Can we get out of the way? Can I get past my colonialized way of thinking? Can I, the colonized way of my brain works sometimes? Can I get beyond the structures that have given me titles and can I think beyond that, go bigger than that, right? And we're living in a day and time where God is calling forth some new things, but it's going to take some courage. And it's going to take us being okay, being in environments like I just said. Do you know how I got through Duke? I got through Duke in the basement of Duke Chapel with the dead presidents. Do you hear what I'm saying? Find, like Reverend Lewis said, find a place that works for you. For me, it was away from all that noise, and I would go into the basement and do my homework. I would go into the basement and pray when I was struggling with racism and classism that was abounding. I would go into the basement. So I would suggest you find your basement. Find that place that allows you to anchor. Find that place that enables you to be reminded how big you are and definitely how big the vision is that God has given you.
Rev Mitchell.
I will be super brief because I know time is short. There has never been a time in my life when the world was rooting for me. Never. Not when I was a little preemie and they were shaming my mama, who was an unwed mother, and treating her horribly at the hospital. Not when I was a little baby dyke trying to find my way. Not when I began transition and I could find no other Black trans masculine people that I knew of until I found Kyler and a few other people along the way. So this time of being alone and distraught and afraid and not knowing what comes next is not a new expression in my life. It's always been this way. How do I get through it? I breathe. And when I'm feeling really, 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 really lost and distraught, I remember the many friends that I lost to AIDS and breast cancer and gay violence and domestic violence and addiction. My friends who were my buddies who didn't get to see 25 or 35 or 45 and damn sure I would be amazed to see 65, which is my next one. And I try to live one day for them when I can't do it for myself. I came to God through 12-step recovery because the church had taught me things that I didn't want to know about them. And in 12-step recovery, if you show up, you're a member. It don't matter if you show up in a 3-piece suit or with 1 shoe and 3 teeth. You get to be a member and claim your seat. I tend to do church like 12-step recovery. If you show up, you're a member. And so for me, when I feel the most desperate, I give myself the grace to cry. I give myself the grace to have grief for what I hoped would be the reality by the time I became this age. And then I live a day for someone who can't. And I think about my 12-year-old baby and think about what would I be willing to do to have them come into adulthood in a different world than the one I'm living in now. That does it for me every time. I drag myself out of bed every day, whether I want to or not, and I do the next right thing, not because I'm so cool and holy and awesome, but because this divine source that created me with this beautiful intersectionality created me as a warrior, and I recognize very clearly that warriors weep.
Thank you. I think we're getting near time. So I want to just say one thing and then ask you all to just maybe summarize, like say one thing that you want to leave us with. But one takeaway that I'm having, when Cedric and I put together the questions and we're thinking about what we wanted to do here, and I want to just admit that my focus was on, oh, the religious right and all the horrors that are out there and what we're seeing on a daily basis and rising authoritarianism, what, like the kind of crisis, and really wanting to listen to people that have lived through moments of real despair. And what I'm coming away with is that may have been just a little too pat. And what I'm hearing in this beautiful discussion is the way in which we have all been part of our own erasures. Like those of us in this space, in this kind of this big alphabet soup, we've been all a part of the erasures of others, right? And that and then in the answers, and just to that last question that Cedric raised, it's so powerful how we're not getting pat little sermons or even like meditate 10 minutes a day or any of the stuff, right? It's like Harry saying anger. How many pastors tell you to go to anger? Like really like explore what is anger? What does it have to say to us? It's a sense of uh like the environment was not built for me, but I figured out Bishop Rawls, I figured out how to be like not to be scared. I figured that out because God was there. And so like this very, very real sense of God that is not the pat shit, right? And then Reverend Lewis, I'm just so struck by there's never been a time when the world has rooted for me. Never been a time. And then like what emerges from like being able to have that voice, the voice of people that have never had that time to be present and to live our lives and to move forward and to find grace and to find community and to find that even though there has never been a time when anyone has rooted for us, right? that was very powerful. And so I guess I want to just ask in the last few minutes if you have a closing thought, maybe not take more than a minute for that if you can, but just a closing thought of something that you'd like to leave for people with folks with.
Less than a minute. You are worth every victory that your battle has in front of you. You are. It don't matter if you're a vote of one, that's unanimous. You deserve the best that life has to offer you. And Reverend Knox, Bishop Rawls have both been examples of you just do the next thing. Are you going to make mistakes? You betcha. Are you going to feel alone and fail? Yep. And so what? I have never had a job for which I've qualified on paper. Look at God. Sometimes you get called to do a thing and you get prepared on the job. Just keep coming. And if you can't go alone, sit down for a minute and find someone to journey with you.
This is a season for big dreams. This isn't the small dream season. This is a season for very, very big dreams. So what I want to challenge everyone around is, number one, get over yourself and your past. Take today as that new beginning and know that everything you need is on the other side of your yes. Some of the answers you're waiting for, you're not going to get on this side of yes. They're only going to come on the other side of yes. You don't need them over here. You need them over here. And it's not a small vision time. So I want to just.
Okay. Technical difficulties do occur. I think we just experienced one. All right. Reverend Knox. There. Any final parting thought?
I really believe in Spirit, Holy Spirit. I believe she has walked with me, guided me, held my hand, and pushed me throughout my life. And I believe that sometimes that has been in the form of really good therapists. And I urge people to use the tools that she has provided, God has provided, if they can afford it, if they have insurance, and if they can't, I hope they will press the powers and principalities in their churches to help them get them if they need.
Okay. Well, friends, family, kindred, siblings, we have come to the conclusion of our time together, save the follow-up, which is still going to be available. And as we wrap up this experience of wisdom from our elders for challenging and dangerous times, it would be wise for us to kind of go forth with words that inspire, that help us move forward. Sometimes they're called blessings, sometimes they're called sending forth, sometimes they're called prayer, sometimes they're called good thoughts or being held in consciousness, a range of ways of talking about positive energy and the ways in which spirit, energy, the ultimate good is present with us. So I would invite Reverend Mitchell to give us a few words of blessing, because we have a purpose ahead of us and we want to go forward with it, feeling ready and prepared as we can be.
Please, as you are willing, incline your hearts in a spirit of connectedness. With respect for the solidarity of our native kindred and communities, we call on the east winds, the energy of new beginnings, the south winds, the energy of growth and warmth, the winds of the west, energy of introspection and maturity, and the winds of the north with energy of wisdom and reflection. Remind us of our own power and possibility, great winds. Swirl and storm to topple the agents of hatred and divisiveness. Remind us of the legacies that live in us, and the ancestors that journey with us. Swaddle and soothe the broken places in us. Remind us of the ingenuity that is bred in our bones. Remind us of our ability to see beyond the binaries and to lead with kaleidoscopic vision. Blow strong winds on our tender embers. Reignite us and resource us beyond our need. Fill our cups to overflowing so that we have more than enough to share, we pray. In the spirit of all that is sacred and holy, in memory of our poets and our prophets, we acclaim that joy is our birthright, love is our birthright, peace is our birthright, self-actualization is our birthright. Ashe, amen, and so it is.
I'm just in awe of what we've had the chance to listen to. Thank you so much, presenters Sharon and Cedric, for convening. Bishop Rawls, Reverend Mitchell, Reverend Knox. This kind of sharing and this listening is so much of what's needed for this day. You will all have the opportunity within a couple of days to get the recording. You'll get a link to the recording of tonight's conversation so that you can share that with friends and colleagues and invite them to be part of this conversation also. If you are interested in more opportunities to explore the history of queer religious movements, check out the LGBTQ-RAN website and particularly our events page. There you will find announcements of future online programs as well as recordings of past presentations. Our next webinar is on Tuesday, July 15th, a workshop on conducting oral history interviews entitled Telling Our Stories, led by Gillian Frank, PhD. This will be an interactive discussion that will offer information about and reflections on methodological and ethical approaches to understanding queer and religious oral history research. I neglected to introduce myself, but I think most of you know that I'm Mark Bowman, Executive Director of the LGBTQ Religious Archives Network. So glad to host this program with you all tonight. So on behalf of everyone here, I think you've seen all the chat and the goodwill, all of you presenters. Thank you so much for your wisdom, for your time, and for sharing this that you have done. Good night to all.